Hello there. We are now on the village trail. I walked along the little road, Goldfinch Avenue, to my neighbour, Frank Robinson.
Yep.
And the reason Frank and I feel that it would be useful to have a few words on this conversation is that my wife's brother-in-law, Tom Longton, was, during the war, serving on the same aerodrome in Yorkshire that our friend Frank here is. And it's been a good week in many ways, but it's also been a memorable and possibly sad week in that our dear friend Tom and my wife Polly's brother-in-law passed away in his sleep gently just before his 900th birthday. Now, Frank, the first thing we need to know is, how old are you?
I will be 93 on the 1st of November.
Which is the same birth date as our family member Tom. So
yeah.
That's another reason why I think this record could be significant.
That's right.
Now, Tom and Marion, his wife, were fortunate. They spent the war together. Marion worked in the office and Tom worked as a ground engineer for the RAF, the Royal Air Force.
Yes.
Now, Frank, could you tell us about your role at Pocklington, please?
Well, I was a wireless operator in aircrew on the Halifaxes, and we only did 2 trips from Pocklington, and then we were posted at Driffield. But we always had admiration for the engineers, because I used to look at those mates and say, "Keep going, you bees." And they kept going. 8 hours was the flight, 4 hours there and 4 back, which a lot of people don't realise now. You go a long way in 8 hours.
And of course you were not in the Royal Air Force, you were in the...
Attached to the Royal Air Force, but we were in the RAAF.
The Australian.
Australian Air Force. So I got posted to Driffield straight after that. There was no vacancy there before. As soon as there was a vacancy, we were posted there.
Yes. And strangely enough, there's so many interesting threads in these last few days. Tom and Marion were living, or were prior to the war. By the way, they got married on the last, I think, very late in December 1939. And in Britain, more people got married in that month than any time in history, because they wanted to get on with it, get married and survive a war.
Yes. Yes.
So they were living in Baldock. Now, the connection between Tom and I and my wife is that we've celebrated this week, earlier, a marriage. Polly and I got married in Baldock Church. And one of the things we learnt years ago from Tom and Marion was that while they were serving at Pocklington, they were both in the Air Force and they both worked together in a way. They had what they described as a good war. They came down on leave to Baldock and were surprised to find one of their mates from the aerodrome in the shopping centre in Baldock. And Tom said, "What are you doing down here?" And the answer from his mate was, "We've been moved down to an aerodrome quite near near Baldock." So that the rest of the war, they were within cycling distance of their home and their parents. So that was their story. Now, what was your lasting memory of that period?
Well, Tommy, it's a totally different story to that. It was a bad war. Yorkshire was muddy, raining, snowing, slush. That's all I can remember. Right. Always wet. In fact, I always remember a fella coming in the door and saying, "It's so bad, the birds are walking." So, we really, times, well, more on Driffield, we had to wait a week or so before we could fly. The weather was just so dreadful. It's hard to believe that when the war ended, the first day after the war ended, was 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Beautiful sunny day.
Good.
And there was a heat wave in London.
Mm-hmm.
So, it must have been due to the war.
How many missions did you fly in total?
10 altogether.
10.
Yes.
And that was over Germany, I take it?
Yeah, yeah. Plenty of other missions, but 10 over
10 over the enemy.
bombing operations.
And you survived those missions, obviously.
Yes, well, we were lucky to survive one. I think it was about the second or third last, and we bombed Berlin, and the navigator passed out. He'd had enough, and I couldn't revive him. So we guessed the direction to go in. It was the opposite. So we flew for 60. we flew for 65 miles west.
Yes.
Is it west or east? East.
Okay.
East. Over and the pilot called me up and he said, "What do you think that is?" And there was a river of fire as far as the eye could see, and it was Russian front.
Good heavens.
I said, "Looks like
you didn't bomb the Russians, did you?
No, it was gone. The bombs were gone, and we were gone. Anyway, the pilot said, I told him, I said, I think it looks like the Allies, our second front. He said, the second front, be buggered. He said, it's the Russian front. How he knew, I don't know. Anyway, he turned around and got us back.
Great.
45 minutes late.
And enough petrol left.
Oh, gee. You could hardly mention that. Just a few drops. And everybody had gone to bed. The whole station was closed up.
Our relative Tom did fly over Germany once.
Yes.
He flew over Cologne after the terrible Blitz, and
yes,
he was shattered to see the consequences. On a more happier note, he had a marvellous flight in one of the Australian aircraft. And Tom had been working, as Frank has said, looking after everybody on the ground, which was so important. Minding the propellers, of course, you had to be careful. But Tom made friends with this Australian pilot, and he said, "I've not, at that time, ever been in an aircraft. I've only done the outside." And the pilot said, "Oh, come on my next training flight." So Tom, delighted, he went on the training flight, and they got up, and all of a sudden 2 Spitfires approached them and started to mock attack, and the pilot started to take evasive action. Now, what the pilot hadn't, the typical Australian, what he hadn't told Tom was it was a training mission, and it wasn't the best way to start to learn how to sit in an aircraft, a Lancaster, when you're under fire from Spitfires, and the plane went round and round and round. But Tom, in his usual ingenious way, solved his problem. In those aircraft, and probably in the Halifax, there was a chute through which you put the flares when you're dropping a flare over the water. And of course, Tom made use of the chute, and he was much better after that.
Yeah.
So that was one of the great memories we learned from Tom. I don't know if you've got anything in that bracket as well.
Yes,
Frank.
I have. Actually, I told you about our navigator. Well, he finished at aircrew after that. And now, in training, there was just nearly as many lost. We were in Litchfield in Wellingtons, took a plane out for exercise bombing one night, and it dropped from 5,000 feet down to 1,000. And we just thought, well, we're gone, finished, 1,000 feet, you haven't got time to bail out.
No.
And they just got it, the pilot, the bomb aimer, pulled it up. And we missed the ground by a few hundred feet.
Oh, dear.
So that wasn't the finish. We're allocated to one plane usually on the Wellington, and 2 or 3 nights later, we were playing cards with the bombing leader, and he was losing money. Our flight turn come up at 10 o'clock, and he said, "Oh, you crew are not going." He said, "You're going at 12," because he wanted to get his money back.
Yes.
So another crew took it, same plane, our plane, did the same, hit the ground, all killed.
Oh, what a story!
How close that was.
And you're here too, hey? That's great, mate. Now we have to close, but both Frank and I and our family shared our daughter's recital, In the past, we shared a recital of great talent by your grandson. Tell us a little about your great-grandson, Frank.
Grandson.
Grandson, sorry. He was great, but not great that
Yes,
great.
I know what you mean. Yes, well, he started at about 7 years of age, and he was reading music and very interested in it. And we were looking after him at the time, and my wife took him in hand and said, you know, if you're going to be a great musician, we'll look after you. So we hired a grand piano after a few years, and he played constantly at our place. And then he went to the conservatory and got his licentiate degree when he was 16. I remember we had a party in Hyde Park, and from there on he was in concerts and things. He went to Spain and London and I think it was Cairo,
And
Jerusalem.
what was his name?
Aaron Macmillan.
That's right.
Yes, until 24. And he was practising one day. He had a unit down Kent Street, and he was practising one day, and he got a sort of a flash in one of the eyes, and he couldn't read the music. He thought there was something wrong. So he went across the road. There was a new doctor came in, a lady from South Africa, and fortunately she was working with Charlie Teo.
Right.
And she recognised straight away what it was.
Yes.
And he went to Charlie, and within 6 weeks, I'd say, they operated. He was 24 then, and he kept going till 30, but he had a piano in the hospital,
That's right.
made CDs.
Remarkable. Pauline to the family, I should have said that, were entertained by Aaron here in the village in the same way that Karen did. He played the grand piano and everybody just was shouted. We went down to hear him in the opera house, a great musician.
Oh,
So life can be full of many joys and, of course, as you've heard from Frank, sadness.
Yeah.
But that's it. Now, I'm running out of time. We've got to get through before the 15-minute limit on YouTube. I'd like to thank Frank, all the other villagers and friends. We had an audience of 60 in the week. We were rejoicing, and with people like Frank on our side, what could you ask for better? Thank you very much, Frank.
It was a wonderful hour with the harp and the singing. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you, Frank.
Good. Tom.